All right. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Rachel Ashton, and I'm on the marketing team here at Ionic. And for today's presentation, I've got our developer advocate, Mike Hartington, with us, and he's going to be walking us through the Ionic development platform and explain how to get started. So before passing it off to Mike, I wanted to let you guys know that you can submit questions using your control panel during this live event, and we're going to answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to you now, Mike.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, please direct all the questions that you may have during this presentation into the control panel. Love to go over any thoughts or ideas that might pop into your mind. Makes this a lot of fun. So let's get going. We're going to dive into it. As Rachel has said, my name's Mike Hartington. I'm a developer advocate for the Ionic team. I've been around with Ionic for, feels like, since the very beginning. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, here's some links that you can find me at. I'm essentially M. Hartington everywhere on the internet. Benefits of having a very unique name. I can take all of the same slugs for everything. So M. Hartington everywhere on the internet. Want to check out some of the demo code or samples that we might have, find me up on GitHub. And let's kind of get right into it. Well, one of the reasons why we started building Ionic many years ago was that we realized that that building for mobile is a difficult problem. Whether you are building natively or using any cross-platform tools, there's a lot of things to keep in mind as you are developing for mobile. Handling different platform designs and styles and interactions, maintaining the code bases, especially if you're doing truly native development. If you're having to maintain iOS, Android, whatever other platforms you want to support, there's a cost to that. Then, if you don't really know how to develop yourself, or you have to hire a team, well, now you have to hire the iOS team and then the Android team and maintain all of that. And if you are the developer and having to learn all these tools, there's so many things that you have to be aware of before you start building your actual product. And that's not necessarily something people want to spend time with. And then to end it all, like, you go around and you might have an iOS app and you might have an Android app. What about your web presence? What about progressive web apps? These are things that you still need to keep in mind and think about as you're developing your app. So what are some of the solutions? Well, you can go ahead and you can build native. We could do compile to native, or we could just use web technologies. Let's kind of see how each one of these break down. Building for native. Well, we've already stated some of the downsides of this in the beginning, is that you need to know multiple language. Even for iOS and Android, there are two kind of flavors, if you will, on how you can develop for these platforms. You could do the older style Objective-C, or you could hop onto Swift. Again, if you don't know any of these languages, well, you first need to figure out which one you want to use and then learn that. And for the Android side of things, you need to either learn Java or Kotlin. Again, might not know Java, you might not know Kotlin. There's a time and dedication to learn these languages and be proficient in each platform. So you go through, maybe you do learn the languages. Well, now you have to maintain all these code bases. If you add a feature to, say, Android, if you add a feature to iOS, you need to now make sure that these code bases and these projects maintain feature parity and are also up to date on any security concerns or any security patches. And if you're looking at this from, say, a manager perspective, you now need to maintain not only the multiple platforms, but multiple teams and coordinate all of these features and all of the development and release cycles together. Just something that you don't necessarily want to do. So let's not build native. What about compile to native? Maybe if we can build towards the native platform, maybe that's a better option? Question mark. Well, compile to native has been around for quite a while, and it does introduce what I like to consider the uncanny valley, where you're creating a native project, but you're compiling to native. If anyone has ever used any of these compile to native platforms, it can be a bit mysterious to see where things happen, where is the code that you're writing, and how does that translate to what's happening when you get to the native platforms. And there's still a lot of work that goes into knowing how each of these platforms behave. You got to know the native development tools. You have to know how to debug a memory issue through Xcode or through Android Studio. So you're still required to know some of these native development tools, which just not really necessary. So let's cross off native compile. What about web technologies? Well, web technologies, it has a really the big benefit of being able to run everywhere. You can take the same web app, run it on iOS and Android, and not have to change anything. Chances are you probably already know a bit of CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, and you can start to work with it and ramp up a lot quicker with what you know, and also learn new things in a much easier fashion. One thing that might be important to you, but I think is really important to myself, is that web standards are an open technology. You can take part in some of these standards discussions and figure out, hey, I want to change the behavior of this. Well, you can go through and you can take part of that, and it's something that you don't really get with the other platforms. And probably the most important one is it's pretty future-proof. There are websites and web apps that you can load that were created 5, 10, 15 years ago. The good one that everyone likes to point to is the Space Jam website. You can still load that for the movie Space Jam, the movie. Think about that. You could load that up on your website on your phone today, and that website will still behave. And there's a lot of other benefits to using web technologies. Insert whatever one that you are proud of, or which one you can think of. It's already in there. So yeah, let's build a web app let's build a mobile app with web technologies. But here's where the downside is. It's like we can build with web technologies, but we're missing some serious features. The reason why people say building with native is always better is because native is like developing on easy mode. You get all of these components, all of these controls, animations, gestures, and behaviors provided to you out of the box by the native development kit. So iOS and Android will come with the components, come with the design language, come with everything that you would expect, and all the developer has to do is wire up the logic and say, I want to get data from here, or I want to display this piece of UI, and the native SDKs will handle all of this. If you're building with the web, traditionally you've had to reinvent these concepts. So the idea of gestures and animations, people have spent time reinventing these and reinventing them for every project. So we started building Ionic thinking, what if we provided all this to developers? So you probably already are aware to a degree what Ionic is, but for those who've never looked at it, Ionic is a collection of components for building not only native mobile apps, but progressive web apps and desktop apps with technologies like Electron. We come pre-built with a bunch of gestures and animations. So if you want to have slides or items that you can swipe to reveal more options, all those gestures are already built in and provided to you, and you just have to wire up the logic for it. We've taken a lot of careful design cues from both iOS material design or the Android design language. And we've figured out we can ship a version of your UI that looks great on iOS and looks great on Android. So we call this platform continuity. You get this for free out of the box. All you do is you use our components, and they will automatically update to fit the platform that they're on. You want to make sure that this is important and that you follow these platform continuities, because your users will be able to tell if something does not feel right or feel at home to their given platform. And benefits to the, in addition to the components and all the gestures and animations, you get full access to the native APIs through a series of plugins. So if you want to access, say, the local file system, or maybe you want to access the Bluetooth APIs, these are all available through a plugin system where you can add a plugin and then automatically make calls to lower level system features. And then the most important part, I think, is the large worldwide community that we have. We have meetups all over the place. We have large user groups between our open source forums and our open source discussion channels. This really is a global community, and we think it's really awesome. So I mentioned components, just to give you an idea of what kind of components we have. We have a small section of components here. We have some what we call list item badges, where we have a list of different list items, and on the right side of the screen, we have this collection of numbers indicating notifications, deleted messages. If you think of any kind of mail app, this is something that you can see pretty much in any kind of app like that. One end from the left, we have a collection of buttons. So you can have different style buttons that look based on different themings. You can change their sizes to be either small, the default size, or large. And then you can even have buttons span the entire length of the screen. Cards are also a really nice one. It's a great way to show a lot of UI or a lot of information in a compact form factor. And then we have a navigation that you can integrate with to navigate to different parts of your app and have it all be linkable and deep linkable. So we have a nice little video over here of how our gestures and animations work. Here we see that we're loading up different sections of our app, and we're able to not only animate to new views or to new sections of our app. We can swipe to go back to navigate back to the main page. We can swipe to reveal different list items. And we can also have full view kind of slide layouts where we can navigate to different parts of our app, or where we can navigate to different views and just do that on gesture. So it's really nice. Here's an example of that platform continuity, which I really want to make push that is very important to platform design languages. On the left-hand side, we see an Android device where it's loading up a very different card layout. And on iOS, we have the same HTML, just it has changed and adapted to the iOS design language. So the code that you end up writing as the developer, literally the same thing. The components are smart enough to know what platform they're on and how they should update their design and their styles to reflect that. Now, native access is a really fun one because if you're developing a native app, chances are you're going to want to do things with, say, the file system, maybe Touch ID, Face ID, accessing the device's calendar or health analytics. And we have this large community of third-party plugins and also first-party plugins that we can talk about a little bit later. But we also created this integration library to make this really easy to add to your Ionic apps. So we have this project called Ionic Native. You add that in, and you can get these really nice streamlined APIs to direct accessing these native features. So again, a great one is the file system or Bluetooth. All of that becomes really streamlined and easy to add to your app and chain together. If access to Bluetooth is enabled, do this, then do that, and bail out when all of these operations fail. And probably the most important part of this is that everything in Ionic itself and all the underlying technologies, they're all open source. So if there are changes that you want to see happen or improvements that you want to share back with the community, you can go through that process of submitting a pull request or adding or submitting a pull request to add that feature or not. It's all MIT open source, so you have to use it whether you make contributions back or not. So how does Ionic work? We kind of went a little bit in on like what Ionic is. How does it actually work? Well, under the hood, Ionic is shipped on a technology called web components. Most important thing is you don't necessarily need to know what web components are to be able to use Ionic. But we talk about them just the way you can bring in any third-party components, use them with ours or use them with not, but know that our components are essentially isolated. So your component library A and Ionic components can work together and in the same project without clashing in on one another. They use modern JavaScript features, so they're all ES modules. They use async await. So you have these really streamlined components that are fast, always lazily loaded, and asynchronous as well. If there are certain browsers or certain runtimes where features aren't necessarily where there are features that we need, we can lazily load polyfills and apply them at runtime. So that way features can be added and then our components can work. But if you're in a browser where all these features exist, and that's more or less modern Chrome, Safari, soon to be Firefox, we can essentially drop all those polyfills and run essentially as fast as possible. And the most important thing is that these components are really small, 1 or 2 kilobytes for an entire component, and even smaller for some of the more basic components. So they can load really quickly, be transferred across the wire if you're making a progressive web app, without spending a lot of time downloading and parsing huge megabytes of JavaScript. Now, all the components built as web components allow us to do these pretty nifty things where we can theme them dynamically using CSS. So CSS, we use this with a API called CSS Variables. So this allows us to essentially create our own CSS properties where we can set different values and then use them inside of our app. A really nifty use case for this is if you're using things like dark mode. It's pretty common these days to see a lot of apps ship a dark mode or user-created themes. All of this can actually be done using CSS variables without having to bring in the cost of yet another style sheet or download that style sheet as the app loads up. This can all be changed at runtime using this nice -- property name and then value. So we provide all the variables that you can change, and you can customize this to your heart's extent. And then we focus on the low-level kind of component layer. So if you are building out your entire app, you can focus on the blocks. But how do you go ahead and you coordinate all of the higher-level business logics, more or less? We do this with an integration with all these popular frameworks. So Angular and Vue. Recently, we've shipped support with React, or no framework if you want to go ahead and have complete control over everything. We also create a lot of framework-specific bindings and tooling. For example, for Angular, we've created a bunch of scripts and integration libraries to help integrate better with the Angular ecosystem. So if you're coming at it from a different framework mindset, the integration feels right at home. We focus a lot on the user experience and how the interface of the app should work. But we think that the framework should really handle how the logic layer, how data is coming into the app, and how you should navigate to different components or navigate to different routes. That should be done by the framework layer, and we can just integrate with that. Now, to get started with Ionic, we can simply install the Ionic and Cordova CLI, and then we can have access to this Ionic start command. Now, this Ionic start command has will walk you through all of the different ideas or different options available to you, and you can change the project type to fit your needs. For right now, we offer Angular as our project type, but we're adding more and more framework feature levels to the CLI in the future. Once we've gone through and created the app, we'll cd into the directory, and then we can run Ionic serve. So let's kind of dive into that a little bit and go over some of these features. So let's bump up the font size. I've already gone through the process of creating the project. I don't necessarily need to do that right now. But we have a project right over here where it's an Angular-based project where we get an angular.json file. We have our configuration file, package.js, basically everything that you would expect to get from an Angular project. If we open this up, we have our source, we have the app directory, some different styles and global things, feeling essentially like we're in a typical Angular project, which is what you would expect. Well, let's go ahead and run Ionic serve. And actually, if we look at this, it's pretty nice to see that all we're really doing is running ng run app serve. The tooling level will go ahead and be smart enough to know if you're in an Angular project, run this command. And if you're, say, in a React or Vue CLI project, you'll have access to those serve commands that come with the project. So this has gone through. It's already gone and started building my project. You see that it's got the local host 8100. So we'll just wait a second for this to finish. It goes through, bundles my entire application where I can just sit back and let it do its work. It's already finished. And what we're going to do real quick is we're just going to enter responsive design mode, basically to emulate the different devices. So here we have an iOS style project. We could actually change this to say, let's go to an Android project. And notice that on reload, we get a completely different look and feel. The header bar is now left aligned and a thicker font. And then the text is also heavier weight as well. If we go down back to the iPhone, our text is center aligned. The font's a little bit lighter, so it feels right at home to the native platform. We go back to our editor. Let's say, let's open up a new terminal session real quick, and let's create a new page. So I've already said that we create a lot of specific tooling for these native platforms. So for example, let's create a page, which is essentially a component in a URL. Let's say Ionic G page, and we'll call it detail. And it's going to use the Angular component generator or schematics to create this component for us. And an important thing to note is that it'll also go ahead and create the routing configuration for us. So this is really nice. We don't have to go through and create all that by ourselves. So if we go to the app and take a look at the app routing module, we see we have the home path and then the detail path, which goes to the detail module. Now, let's go to our homepage template for this. Let's create a button. And since we're in an Angular project, we're going to use the router link. In fact, we can get rid of those. And we're going to pass in a path that we want to navigate to. So in this case, we'll load the detail path, and we'll set the text for this to say, go to detail. We'll write and save our file. And when we go back to the browser, it'll automatically reload for us. And we can say, go to detail. And we have that page to navigate in. Now, one thing you notice is we don't necessarily get a button in here to navigate back. So let's navigate back here, and we'll go to the detail page.html. And to do this, we have this nice component called Ion back button. So we'll create a buttons, and we'll place it on the left side of our component. And we'll create an Ion back button. And if there's no history, we'll default to going back to the home component. So we'll let that save. Go back to our browser, wait for it to refresh. Now, when we click go to detail, we'll have that back button automatically appear. We can hit back and animate back to the main screen. So this is pretty simple. I think it was about 5 minutes, and I already have navigation, routing, and all these animations wired up into my app. And all I really had to do is just run a few commands. So let's go back to the slides. Now, there's a lot more to Ionic than just the open source side of things and the CLI and all the typical editor tooling. We also have this platform where we want to offer more features that can enhance your development experience. One of those is a tool called Ionic Studio, which is a local editor that brings in all of the features that you would know and love from insert your favorite editor here, where you can also create customized experiences for an Ionic project. So if you are a developer, you can focus on all of your TypeScript, your JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. But then we also have customized experiences where developers can start modifying different themes and different screens and laying out, drag and dropping components into the screen itself before actually ever touching code. And then when you want to go back to the code itself, it's as easy as just clicking a different toggle. So this is really nice, and it really enhances your development experience. We think it's pretty awesome. We also have an entire pipeline system we call AppFlow, which is essentially a customized Ionic CI and CD system. So if you are making commits and pushing those commits to a hosted Git service, AppFlow can go ahead and watch those commits, pull them in, and automatically enable a build. So as you go through, you can make your commits, push that to source control. AppFlow will watch it, pull that build in, and attempt to actually build your project. If the build fails, you'll get a warning, and you'll get an email saying, hey, this has failed. If the build has succeeded, you have a couple different paths you can go down. You can say, yep, the build succeeded and good to go. You can go to the continuous delivery approach, where you can say, if the build has succeeded, let's go ahead and ship a build of this to our iOS and Android app platforms and have that automatically be deployed, which is really nice. And then you can also bring in all of your third-party integrations, for instance, GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket. And then one of the newer features that we have is what we call Ionic Enterprise Edition. Essentially, this is a way for us to say there are developers out there who want more from the open source side of things, custom features, security, advisory, to be able to build on top of all the great open source stuff that we do, but then also have the backing and kind of support from the core Ionic team. We've also done a lot of custom plugin development as well. So if you have certain needs or features that you want added to your app, we can work with you and try to and develop that with you. This is a really nice way. Our training and advisory services have been very successful and had a lot of good feedback from our users. So inside of the slides that we passed out today, we have a collection of links and documentation resources that we want to point you to. We have a huge community hub, forum, and Slack channel if you want to join in, start figuring out what's going on in the Ionic ecosystem. But if you want to dive into the code and the projects right away, definitely want to check out the framework docs and also the CLI docs. They're definitely going to help you get up and running really quickly. Well, it's really the end of the presentation. We've gotten quite a bit of questions coming in, so let's take this moment to kind of go over some of these questions and see what's on your mind. We'll pop that out to its own window. All right. So, first question was getting an email about Ionic Studio. So Studio is going through a early trial period right now, where we're reaching out to different vendors and different developers to get feedback and develop with it. If you haven't received an email from the team, it doesn't mean that we haven't gotten it. It's that we are slowly going through a list of clients and people that we are working with to make sure that when we ship Studio, it's the greatest version that it can be, and that we have all of our situations covered. So if you haven't received an email yet, please reach out again. We'll get back to you and figure out what's going on. So next question is, will ng add Ionic ever be possible? Yes, this is actually possible right now. So generally, what the question is really asking is, if I have an already existing Angular project and then want to add Ionic without having to create a brand new project, is there a way I can do this without having to start everything all over? Yeah, with Angular, we can run ng add at Ionic/Angular. In fact, let's go to the CLI. So you would run ng add at Ionic Angular, and this will go through, add the Ionic Angular package. This will go ahead and it will install the correct styles and add the import statement for you without having to do any of this yourself. You could still do it yourself if you want to, but the ng add schematic is really nice. Next question is, does Ionic support Xcode 10? Yes. So Xcode 10 came out, and I'm gonna guess the situation that you're thinking of is that recently builds started breaking. Yes, Xcode changed the way how builds work. We have worked with the Cordova community and the Cordova iOS team to provide feedback on different tests. And actually, if you install Cordova iOS at 5.0 or at latest, you'll get Xcode 10 compatibility, and you won't see any obscure errors printed out in your terminal. So that should work out really well. Are there any certifications in Ionic? Currently, no. We don't offer any certification to say you are an Ionic certified developer. We haven't really thought about this too much. So, in fact, if you want to shoot me an email or send some feedback afterwards, I'd love to get your thoughts on this and see what we can do. Next question is, what do I miss if I don't use capacitor in my project? I'm familiar with Ionic Native. At the moment, you don't miss a whole lot. Capacitor does a lot of work that's under the hood for future-proofing native projects. You do miss a lot of customization that you could do at the native level if that's something that you are interested in. But if that's things that you are not interested in, you might not necessarily need capacitor. Cordova is still supported and is actually part of the Ionic Enterprise Edition. So if you want more customized features, we can have that worked into Ionic Native and worked into your own project. This is a double part question. Will Ionic, is it better to start a Ionic project with capacitor or Cordova? Will capacitor be ready within a month? So capacitor itself is not is in a beta right now. So you can start capacitor projects right now and get going. If you are concerned about that beta label, I would suggest going with Cordova. One of the awesome things, though, that we have done with capacitor is baked in Cordova compatibility. So if you are using a Cordova project and you decide at a later point that you want to move to capacitor, you can start to make that migration and know that a lot of the core plugins from Cordova will automatically be supported within capacitor. All right, so we have 3 questions that are pretty awesome. How can we get access to Ionic Studio? How can we try it out? If you go to the Studio landing page from Ionic-Framework.com, send us an email. We'll get in touch with you if when we get through our list of people who are validating Studio right now and when we want to start sharing it more openly. I want to implement. So this is a very specific question. They want to implement some sort of specific UI. I would direct you to the Ionic forum right now. That's a great place to ask questions about custom features. If you want community help, or you could reach out to the Ionic Enterprise Edition. We can help you out with that custom feature. You can reach out from the Ionic-Framework site yet again, and that will be able to advise you on what's the best approach to do with that. Or if you want to stick with the open source side of things, Ionic-Framework forum is probably the best place to ask that kind of question. Single user license, does it have to be an enterprise team account? This is actually a really good question. Let's see. I don't have the answer for this right now. In fact, if you want to send me an email, mike@ionic.io. We can go ahead and we can discuss this a little bit further, and I can direct you to the right people. And probably one of the last questions right now is, does Ionic integrate with Adobe Experience Manager? Yes, we do integrate with Experience Manager with Adobe or AEM. If this is things that you want to do, again, reach out to the Enterprise Edition. We can get you pointed in the right direction and have that situated for you. So there's a few more questions, but we're going to actually wrap it up right now. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We will send out a copy of these slides if you haven't already downloaded it. Thank you for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun.